Hello, and welcome to the Radiant Mission podcast. My name is Rebecca Toomey, and I'm here with my amazing co-host and sister, Rachel Smith.
Hey guys.
We are on a mission to encourage and inspire others as they're navigating through this life and with their relationship with Christ. Today, we are diving deep into our favorite topic of all, and that is birth. We are joined by Courtney Valdez. She is a wife and a mother of 2 daughters under 2. Pregnancy and birth have been catalysts for her passion and love for autonomous birth. Courtney has experienced the medical system, a birth center, and home birth, and she's here to share her story and testimony with us. Courtney, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, thank you guys so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I was so moved when you shared your story with me. There's so many parts of it that resonate, especially when you shared with me about, kind of that shift from the medical system to midwives and how we often put our trust in them the same way that we put our trust in, say, our doctors. And there's just so much that parallels with your story that I relate to. And I know that this is a story to be shared and a story that is going to encourage others, women out there. So take us through your journey. What did it look like from your lens?
Well, I'm like, gosh, this was almost my first daughter is almost 19 months. So sometimes you just wonder, how have you been in my life for such a short period of time? But I feel like you've been in my life forever. So I'm like, let me go back and get my memory. I started when I got pregnant. I had none of the knowledge that I think us 3 women have now, right? About the medical industrial birth complex and just kind of what's going on inside of it now. So I really went to my mom, who's the first person you go to when you get pregnant? You're like, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant. Where should I go? What should I do? Right. So immediately off the bat, totally outsourcing my decisions to someone else. And just a little bit brief story there. My mom had 2 pretty traumatic hospital births, 2 episiotomies without her consent, heavily medicated, induced, all the things, right? So maybe wasn't the best person to ask for direction, but also was the only person I knew to ask. At that time, it was peak COVID, all of the restrictions and all the things. So I think I was already approaching pregnancy with some fear of just isolation in pregnancy and then isolation in birth. So I did start out at a local hospital. Inside of that hospital, I'll do this kind of fast. Inside of the hospital, I saw OB, switched to a midwife at the hospital. Somewhere in the midst of that, hired a doula, and she was like, you don't fit the mold for a hospital. I have the perfect solution for you. There's a local freestanding birth center. I think who she was, the doula who she worked for, they have some sort of collaborative between this doula business and the freestanding birth center. So I think that's kind of what they do, recruit people to go give birth there, right?
Recruit.
Yeah, who are
keyword
seeking,
there, right?
Yeah, who are seeking, because I always knew I wanted an unmedicated birth.
Yeah.
I guess another generational kind of piece of my story was I come from a long line of addiction. I've seen people kind of numb everything in their lives my whole life. And I was like, gosh, my mom and I have always said it's such a joy and we're so fortunate to feel even when it's bad. So I kind of already had that mindset, right? Birth is going to be bad, but at least I want to feel it. So there was so many things to unpack about how I even approached the first birth, but I said sayonara to the hospital. They were 5-minute visits and I sat in the waiting room. You've heard this story a million times. I sat in the waiting room for 45 minutes. They didn't know my name. There was no informed consent. Next appointment, you're getting TDAP. It wasn't hey, can we talk about this? It was just this is what we're doing.
Yep.
Check this off the list, go make an appointment. We'll see you next time. I don't care how excited you are. I don't want to talk about anything else,
Yeah.
So
yeah. Do you have any questions? And
yeah,
then it's
no.
No. Should I? What should I ask?
If I had questions. Everyone was masked. So there was already that sense of just it wasn't personal. There was nothing personal about it.
Yeah.
So I transferred to the birth center and the birth center holistic, right? Holistic midwives. We support autonomous birth and all these things. And the crazy thing about the birth center, now that I think about it, was no different than a hospital in the sense that there was 6 midwives. You
Mhm.
saw a different midwife at every appointment. It
Mm.
wasn't personable at all. You never knew who was going to be on call. So
Mhm.
every appointment, while it was more personable, it was kind of a
It
toss
was
up.
still a rotation.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And granted, like there was definitely more informed consent, um, seemingly up until like 38 weeks. Anytime I denied something, like a routine check or intervention or like blood draw, um, they were cool with it. But
Mhm.
there were so many nudges,
Mhm.
but I wasn't listening and I didn't know what they meant. I
Mhm.
hadn't leaned in, I guess, into my intuition enough at that point, and truly I don't think I was having as spirit led of a pregnancy as I did in my second,
Okay.
because there was constantly times where I feel like, God was telling me like, you're uneasy, you're approaching these appointments walking on eggshells, and you're leaving with this huge sigh of relief for a reason, right? Like I constantly just felt like I was going to the appointments waiting to get rolled out of care. And so
Mm.
it was all fear based, right? Like
Mhm.
my
Mhm.
my fear of the hospital was so deep that I sometimes wonder if that also wasn't what kind of came to fruition in my later NICU transfers. Sometimes I feel like if we don't, in those moments, deal with those fears, like, and somehow that's really what we're delivered, and
Mhm.
for a reason. I
Mhm.
know that God put me in those positions for a reason, but there's so many things that were being put in front of me, and God was talking to me, and I wasn't listening.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. What you said, I feel like so many pregnant women relate to. Like I'm pregnant right now. I just got into my third trimester,
Congratulations.
and I'm in a pregnancy like forum for women do the same month as me. And I just saw a post the other day of this woman asking if she's overreacting because every one of her appointments, her doctor essentially fat shames her that she's gaining too much weight and it's dangerous to the baby. And she said she leaves every appointment crying. And she was like 25 or 26 weeks when she shared this. And she's like, it's too late for me to transfer though. And I responded to her and commented, first of all, it's not too late for you to transfer. And second of all, you should not be in a situation where every time you're in that room with that person that you're crying afterwards. That's a huge red flag. And kind of like what you were saying you were experiencing of when you walk out of it, like your intuition is telling you that, or oftentimes it's God is like urging you, like, this isn't right. And so we really need to, learn to trust that and because it's all like practice for when we're actually mothers, because that is like on another level after the baby's born of trusting our instincts, our intuition, and what God is telling us and all that. So,
And it's practice for when we go into labor or our birthing time. If we don't know how to say no or change or stand up for ourselves during the pregnancy process, then I feel, for me personally anyway, it comes out. The same thing comes out when our birth happens, because I was in your exact same situation, Courtney, where I was going to people. I had moved in 30 whatever weeks pregnant from Connecticut to Tennessee. I was going to this practice someone recommended. They didn't let me rotate. I had to see the same doctor, even though I was going to see whoever was on call. I felt uncomfortable. I felt like I needed to not be there, but I never switched care because I was paralyzed. I didn't know that I had those choices then. And I think that what all three of us are trying to say to anybody listening is that, like, don't be us or don't do what we've done. Learn from these situations that you can leave or quit care or go unassisted at any time, which might seem really scary to some people. But I also relate to, you mentioned your first birth didn't feel as spirit led. I was very much the same way. I wasn't focused on what God was trying to tell me or teach me during my first pregnancy. I was just going through the motions of what everybody does, go to the OB, go to your appointments. It didn't feel right. There was something that was unsettled in my spirit, but I wasn't leaning into the Lord to really guide me to those next steps, which changed very much in my second birth. And I think it did for you too. So keep walking us through.
I just want to add to that because I've had like this revelation, and like it's what I tell people now is what's harder. And it does suck that we have to pick our suck, but what is
Yeah.
harder, because I felt tired. I can honestly say, like, at that point, I was broken down, and that probably spiritually too.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I can't change providers. I don't want to go tell my story again. I don't want to go do all these labs again. And God forbid, like they let me down too. I'll just stay here and we'll pray for the best. But it's like, what's harder, continuing to fight for the birth that you want
Mm-hmm.
or healing from a
Yeah.
traumatic birth?
Yeah.
And the
For
latter,
sure.
and I've lived it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
We remember our births. We're going to remember it for the rest of our lives. Look at your situation with your mom. You went to your mom. She's the person that you trust. And I'm sure she could recall the most traumatic parts of her birth the same today as she could years ago. Maybe there's little details that she doesn't remember, but she remembers the drama that she experienced.
Mhm.
Our mom was the same way. She had two very poor hospital births for her first two, and then her second two, my sister and I, she actually had in a birthing center. And interestingly, I never really talked to her about those births until I was pregnant with my second and I was having a home birth. And I started to just ask her more questions, and she remembered a lot. And
And
it
she
was
does not have a very good memory usually, but she remembered that.
she remembered a lot, but it was also really interesting how I felt her experience was very led and managed, even though she was in a birthing center, and not her being taught to go with the flow of what her body was telling her. They were still coach pushing, having her go through coached pushing. I'm pretty sure the way that she described my birth, that I was posterior. And I think they had her pushing before she needed to be pushing, because she pushed for a long, like hours and hours. So it's interesting that 36 years later, she still remembers those details because they stuck with her. There was a trauma there that was attached with it. So you're right. What's harder, making a change or having to remember that birth experience until you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s?
Well, and I think it feels lonely, right? But we're called to be set apart. So I think we have to start looking at these things and go, maybe it's not so weird that I'm going against the grain, because if this is what the grain looks like, I'm okay being alone. But it's
Sure.
so hard when you're alone.
It
And I
is.
so many women, not only are they alone with support, but then, maybe that their mother, like this person that they absolutely adore and admire, or their husband, when you're also alone inside of your home, and
Mhm.
then you have to go out and go against societal norms, that can just be absolutely tiring, and it
Mhm.
just breaks you down, and you're like, I will settle for crumbs, and most women do.
Yeah,
Then
you're
we
so
come out of
right.
it and we're like, it could have been more traumatic, because that's what I
Yeah.
did. It took me months to know that what I experienced was traumatic, because I was like, well, I got a vaginal birth, I wasn't in the NICU for very long, you know I was unmedicated, and it's like, oh, that's so icky now that I think about it,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
because
my second was traumatic, but it took me a long time to realize that's what I was feeling, because also what we hear is, well, everything's fine now, and it sounds
Like
like you
it
had.
all worked out. Or of course your baby is healthy and fine.
Yeah. And
Oh,
so when you're told that, then you kind of like shove it all down, but then you're not actually processing, and that just prolongs the trauma than really just facing it head on, like, this was not right, what happened. And that's what I think so many women get caught up with in any of these models, is when things are being done to you and you don't feel like you have a voice or power to speak, then you're just going along with things, losing autonomy. And even that can be traumatic later, that, oh, I wasn't in control there. And people were, you know, almost taking advantage. Like, not that they're maliciously doing it, they're working in a system that they know, but they're kind of steamrolling you and taking away your personhood.
And
Absolutely.
arguably, it is taking advantage, right? Because we're
Yeah.
not in a thinking brain.
Right.
And most of these people operate on such a medical and scientific model that they know that. And when you
Right.
know someone isn't accessing those parts of their brain, or they have already stated, these are things I don't want, and you notice that weakness and you do it, that's taking advantage. I mean,
Absolutely.
it
It's a good
really
point.
is.
Yeah. I've seen that in a lot
We're
of
so
these.
kind, right? As women, we're like, they didn't mean it. It's like, but
I've seen that in a lot of these videos from, Instagram or TikTok where they show labor and delivery nurses or midwives or folks that they're so desensitized to their experiences that oftentimes they don't consider the individual woman or personhood that's standing or sitting or laying right in front of them, because to them it's a shift and they're just getting through it. Oh, and this one's bothering me or screaming or going through whatever it is that she's doing. And you're not a person to them in a lot of ways. And I don't want to demean an entire group of people, but it's to say that I see a lot of desensitization in the industry about the humanness and the human nature of what it is that we're going through. And it's almost like they're so used to using drugs to manage people that they don't know how to communicate with another person in a verbal sense, in an emotional sense. It's not like they're sitting down with you and emotionally connecting to what it is that you're going through. There are some nurses and midwives that have that ability, but the majority of people, it's like they're turned off completely to humanity during those scenarios. At least that was my experience once I was in the hospital.
yeah.
So,
So
one other thing I want to say on this, I don't know any person that has, any woman who has ever had an episiotomy that does not remember it and has not been traumatized by it for the rest of their lives or had some sort of other issue because of it. It is horrific to me. It's like one of the worst. It's like a crime against humanity, in my opinion. But
Well,
that's
that's why these days, a lot of people are advocating that it's medical rape to do
oh,
yeah.
that.
absolutely.
I
I get
mean,
a visceral response when I think about that happening to my
Yeah.
mother.
right,
And that's
right.
Yeah.
generational, right? Like these
Oof.
things are stored in our body. And arguably that happened to me too because we were one.
Yeah, because you were there. I mean, your body was coming out of your mother's body at the time of this event.
We do everything though, and I go back to this. Everything is for the convenience of others. Even the
Mhm.
way mothers mother now, right? Like for my comfort and whatever, all we can leave the baby in the other room and cry. Or it's all we're also uncomfortable being uncomfortable, right? Like
Mhm.
I can't really sit here and watch her push for another 5 hours. Granted, she's on her back and all these other things, slew of
Mhm.
other things. So boop, it's nothing to me, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I'm not gonna have to live with this. I gotta, what time is it? I gotta go.
We like live in this world of convenience without understanding the ramifications of, not leaning into slowness.
Absolutely. So take us through the next part of this for
Okay.
you. You were going to this hospital. You were then moved to or made the decision to move to this birthing center that you were told would be a better fit for you. They were letting you deny things, so you had this illusion in a way that you were able to be autonomous and make your own decisions. But it sounds like things started to shift as you got
Yeah.
later.
I want to look at when it was. I think it was right at 38. I want to say 38 and a half weeks. I finally remembered to send in my birth plan because that was something they were really big on was, birth plan, birth preferences though, right? Because nothing goes as planned, and is how they would put it. So I sent in my birth preferences, and it's kind of funny because I'm like, why did I even pick any of these things? I don't know if I could have really told you, but I guess some things online that I had looked at,
Mhm.
like really led me to think like, I don't need this. I don't want that. And fundal massage was one of them. I read, and it's not fundal massage, it's fundal pressure. Let's call it what it is. I read about how horrendous it was. And I was like, I can do these things on my own, right? Like, if necessary, I can touch and put pressure on my own fundus. I want an uninterrupted third stage. That
Mhm.
was really the only part of it that I really wanted control over and really advocated for what I want was no fundal massage under any
So
circumstance.
don't touch that area during the actual baby coming out part.
After, after, after the
After.
delivery of the placenta. That was my big
Oh,
thing. No
interesting.
fundal massage.
Okay.
And because I think a lot of people do it to control bleeding. And this
Oh,
is
I'm
a
sorry. I don't know why I was thinking of the perineum. You're talking about the
yeah,
fundus,
yeah,
which is
absolutely
the
no perineal massage.
which is
uh,
the pressure. So the fundal massage, for those that aren't familiar, is when they put pressure on your uterus. And it's funny that you said no, it's pressure, not massage, because it's not a massage. They press as hard as they can onto your stomach and press into it to basically what is it that they say it does? It make sure that all the excess blood and whatever comes out.
yeah,
But there are actually studies and experiences out there that say that it actually can cause further damage and can cause hemorrhaging for some women because it's a plate size open wound that you now have in your uterus and you're applying pressure to
and
that.
I think I had read a Cochrane review of it,
Okay.
and the only reason I know that is once, and I said no pitocin.
Mhm.
I didn't want pitocin. I didn't want to be drugged. Definitely didn't want to be drugged at that blissful moment of when I met my baby and when all those hormones were absolutely necessary for our connection, for the delivering of my placenta, and just the rest of our lives, you could argue, right? The blueprint of motherhood is set up in those moments.
Mhm.
I believe they're so crucial. And I should have known that was going to be an issue because I want to say at 36 weeks, we went over Pitocin. I had like this little booklet, I have it here. And each appointment, we would kind of check off boxes of what we talked about. And they were like, we're seeing a lot of women elect to have routine Pitocin after delivery. That was a huge red flag for me. Boop.
Mhm.
I just said, no, that's not for me. I don't want it. The sheer fact that they're offering women routine Pitocin is a red flag. That's a red
Absolutely.
flag.
Yes.
And not talking, yeah, I have this little book, right, of informed consent, but in those moments, all those things should be covered,
Mhm.
right? When we're talking about routine crap.
Mhm.
And so she called me that day, and I'll add this in there. This one particular midwife, every time I saw her, I don't know, we just come into contact people where we're like, I don't like you.
Mhm.
And I didn't like her. We just did not jive. She made me feel the most uncomfortable. We just had something about each other. We didn't jive. And this one midwife, and now I wonder, like, is it because she knew she was going to be on call around my due date or something that she had such an issue with it?
Mhm.
But it's funny because I pulled this paperwork up and it says, we want to know Courtney has a clear expectation for her in the terms of what she can expect and how we can attempt to accommodate her preferences.
My
So essentially, I
goodness.
was called at 39 weeks and told, if you do not change the verbiage in your birth plan, we don't know if we can serve you.
What?
Mhm.
So they're
They
saying
want
if
bundle
you do
massage.
not agree to do things the way that we want them done,
Absolutely.
then
And
we're
we can
not
dress
going
them up in
you are
pretty
not going
words.
to get the autonomy that we told you that you were going to get.
Yeah.
So it's the illusion.
It's a
It's
bait and switch, though. This
yeah.
happens to so many women. Oh,
Mhm.
we're 40 weeks. She's been a freaking angel, and now I see her true colors.
Mhm. Yeah. I wonder if that was why you guys didn't drive because there is this I don't know if it's personality is the right word or there's this control aspect that goes to being in the position that a midwife or an OB is in,
Fully.
where they take that, they take that control over your birth. Most of them anyway. There are some people that are angels out there that believe, that know how to sit on their hands, that know how to step back and let you do your thing, and they're just there to, just in case if you need anything. But those are far and few between. Most of these folks are on top of you. And it almost sounds to me like she knew you were going to be a problem for her control, or for the control of other women in the practice of how they wanted things to be done. And that's not true freedom. That's not true autonomy.
Mhm. And I
Oh,
mean,
man.
to everybody's surprise, I got extreme fundal pressure and Pitocin.
Oh my gosh.
So
Wait,
So they
did you
did it anyway. Did you change
did
the
you
plan for them, or you said no?
no, my only compromise was I would massage my own fundus.
Okay.
but they did
And
it to you anyway?
yeah, and I will preface with this. In the moment, I consented to it because I was done. Is it consent though? Like I go through all these things where it's like when things are backed by fear and the room felt the way it did, it's like, God, massage my fundus. Let's do whatever I want my baby. Shoot me up with Pitocin. This is what you wanted. Just give me my baby.
Mm.
Like you just want to be a good girl so you can get your present.
Yeah. You're backed into a corner.
Hmm. Yeah.
So you had your baby,
Yeah.
and then how long did it take for you to birth your placenta?
I want to say, gosh, I have my doula wrote something up. I think it was within 10 minutes,
Oh
but it
my,
was
and
on
how soon did they give you Pitocin?
I have to look. I could look at she gave me a whole, like, a literal moment by moment playback of my birth, which was like kind but also like wildly triggering. So let's see.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I was Stevie, my daughter. She was born at 5:34. My placenta was born at 5:43. It doesn't even talk about when I was given Pitocin, but let's just say they at 5:46 they checked for tears. So somewhere within minutes, I was given fundal pressure and Pitocin, and that was almost like a you thought, that doesn't make any sense. It was all, when I think about it, even without the timeline, it was boom, 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 boom
Mhm,
after that.
mhm.
Wait, could you go back for a second? Because I feel like we kind of skipped over it for the actual birth, like
Yeah,
how that went with
yeah,
them.
yeah. So I
Rebecca's
think,
like, and then you had the baby, and then the
yeah,
placenta comes out. It's like, I want to
yeah,
hear
Well, we
about
were
having the
talking about
baby.
the fundal massage, so I wanted to know how
yeah.
quickly they were doing that, and then the Pitocin,
Yeah,
because
it was
it
all
seems
within 5
unnecessary.
minutes. It was all within 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That was their routine, though. I would argue, like, gosh, I wish I could get the stats, right? Like, that was just what they were doing, and I think I was like I don't know, just some random that was like, "No, I don't want that," and they were like, "Oh, no one's ever said that they didn't want that,"
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
don't think they had the wherewithal and or the ability to, like you said, go, "Okay,
Yeah.
well,"
Because
you know,
here's what doesn't make sense to me. All right. So our body produces oxytocin when we're in labor, and that is what makes our uterus contract, along with some other hormones. So we're contracting, we're contracting. The baby is born. We continue to have contractions. Those contractions also work with our body to get our placenta out. The
Mhm,
purpose of Pitocin is to augment oxytocin to cause harder, crazier contractions. So it
mhm.
just doesn't make sense to me if your placenta was born so quickly. It was born. That's what I say. Your placenta was born so quickly, then it was like there was no need for that.
Right.
But anyway, that's my assessment of the situation.
I think I'll go into my birth, like Rachel said, and it'll start to make more sense.
Okay.
So I was 39 and 5 when I started having timeable contractions. I kind of consider that like going into
Mhm.
labor. I think I had a lot of prodromal labor, just, a lot of softening and opening leading up to that. but they were super consistent. So that's when you get all giddy and excited, right, with your first baby. And I think it started like 8:30 at night. It was October 6th. August 6th, my second baby is October 6th. Don't tell her I did that. August 5th, I had her on the 6th, which was our anniversary. I joke that's how I knew I was having a girl, because she was coming to steal my man. She was going to be born on our anniversary. So I just kind of knew that was going to happen. Anyways, I think it was like 8:30, started having timeable contractions, let my doula know. I did not sleep that night. I was so excited. Like, I don't know how to explain. I tried playing down, but I was like, oh no, I'm going to ride this out. It was fun. I was listening to worship music. I think by 8:30 the next morning, I like text my doula. I was like, come over. Like, I'm paying for this. I want you to come massage my back and like all these cool doula things, you know? So I think she got there that morning at like 6:30 actually. And then 8:30 on the dot, my water broke. And something I'm remembering now is I just remember my doula being like, hey, usually after a woman's water breaks, her contractions get really intense. And like now I look back and I'm like, so annoying. So annoying. I was doing great. Like, yeah, contractions are contractions, waves, surges, whatever. Like it can be intense. I mean, they're not like, oh, I love the way this feels, no matter how painless your birth is. But I was really enjoying things, and I just felt like that was one of the first shifts happened, was when
That was
someone
like a
spoke,
mental shift for you, that she psyched you out a little bit.
yeah, kind of like spoke that over me, like now they're probably going to get painful. And that was whatever. I think in like 2 hours I was ready to go to the birth center. After my water broke, I got really emotional, and I don't know if it was like a little bit of fear, but it was like, your water broke, like you're not a mother, you're about to be a mother. I think there was so many things that kind of quite literally flooded me in that moment. And so whenever you go into labor, you have to call the birth center and let them know. And I just remember in that moment, my doula called for me and she was like, so and so, she who will not be named, is your midwife on call. And I just kind of felt like my spirit even broke in that moment of like, this sucks, but I've always been the kind of person that like, I refuse to like succumb to being like a victim, or just like, I wasn't going to let that rob this moment from me. So we got to the birth center. Things were progressing, I felt like, pretty quickly. First I get there, I didn't deny cervical checks. I was really big on consent. Like, right, if you're going to touch me, it's going to be consensual. So I even felt like the way she would ask me, like, she was just really snide. She would be like, can I check your cervix? I don't know. Like, she was so spiteful that it was like, yes, you can. At least you're asking me for consent, And that was just kind of the story, right? Like, constant cervical checks. I was in and out of the water, right? The water's too hot, this and that, in and out, in and out. There was 2 different nurses who would come in. My doula was in there. My husband Jordan was in there. It was hot. But somehow in the midst of all of this, like, and that's what I consider to be supernatural peace, is I floated away. It was intense. And there was a point where I was like, I am dying, like, I'm dying. This is cracking me open and there ain't nowhere else to go. I'm going to die and I'm going to wake up with a baby. But somehow I was like loving it. I've always kind of been a person who like really likes hard things. I think we really find out who the hell we are in the midst of hard things. And maybe that's like a little small bit of that like addictive personality in me that, like, once I started riding that wave of birth, even though it was hard, it was like, oh, I can see why people really like this. At one point she had checked me. I mean, if you check a cervix enough, and at what point is someone going to have a cervical lip, right? It's like you're peeling through it with a fine tooth comb. At one point, it's not going to necessarily be ready. And I think she had checked me at that point, I had started to have fetal ejection reflex. I didn't know what the heck it was. I was kind of having like those deep guttural responses in the tub, where kind of like at the end of a contraction, I would just feel like the urge to kind of bear down, or even kind of sound like you're throwing up in a way. It was weird to me. And they were like, she's getting pushy, so she checked me and she was like, oh, there's a cervical, had me get out of the tub, check me, there's a cervical lip. Can I move your cervical lip out of the way? And I didn't know what the hell cervical lip was. Like, just, I guess, I was a little misinformed. I thought I read all the books. I thought I did all the things. I did way too many textbook things in preparing for this labor. It's probably a whole other story to tell. So she's like, can I move your cervical lip out of the way? Which was arguably, even in comparison to me telling you that my body felt like it was going to break wide open, the most painful, invasive part of my labor was her reaching inside of me during a contraction and trying to move my cervix out of the way. When, now knowing what I do, knowing what I know now, my cervix didn't have a lip. It wasn't ready. It was still working. It was like luck of the draw. If you stick your fingers in there every 15 seconds, we're probably going to find a lip at one point,
You're probably going to feel something because
Yeah.
it's there.
So at that point, I maybe felt a little defeated and I started getting tired. I think I pushed for about 2 hours involuntarily.
Wow.
And
So you
finally,
definitely weren't ready.
yeah. So finally, one of the nurses was like, why don't you lay down on the bed and rest? Because I just started saying, I'm a little tired. And so I don't know, like I go back to absolute, like if there's people who don't believe in God, I can't understand how you couldn't, because like I just felt like in that moment, it'll make me emotional. It's so weird. In that moment, I was just met with like supernatural peace. And for an hour, I fell asleep while experiencing, pushing, involuntary pushing. And I got to sleep for literally an hour through that and was finally left alone. Like
Mhm.
I think about it, like at least for an hour of that labor, I was left alone.
Mhm.
And I think at the end of that hour, they came and they checked me, and she was like, "Oh, you're complete. You can start pushing now." And at that point, I think it kind of just really caught me off guard of like, now you can go ahead and really force push. Screw fetal ejection reflex or whatever you had going on. I felt like, kind of like you said, even about like kind of the medical model, well, we'll just cut you open. It was like, well, you need to start pushing now. I've kind of been here for a while.
Mhm.
I kind of sensed that sense of urgency from her. So I was like, all right. I wasn't even waiting for contractions, at that point. I was on the bed on my back. They had suggested I get on my hands and knees, but I don't know. Sometimes once you're in that zone, you're not open for suggestions,
Mhm. Mhm.
And I was like, I'll just push where I'm at. So I think it was about 4 or 5 minutes of pushing on my back at that point once I was 10 centimeters dilated,
Mhm.
complete, even
Mhm.
though even though now I wasn't ready to push, even though I was complete.
Mm. Yep.
Still don't believe it was time, especially
Mhm.
considering I had been experiencing fur up until that point,
Mhm.
you know? So I think I pushed for a while and I was struggling, right? Because I wasn't pushing with contractions and I was on my back. And I mean, the nurse, the midwife, my doula, and my husband are all sitting there watching me,
Yeah.
like, and I'm like, and I think I didn't even know this. And it's so crazy. Like you said, you go through your paperwork and she had, I guess, asked if she could do like finger forceps, which is where you use your fingers as forceps to bring the baby out. So I was
Oh no.
also
Oh, I know all
violated,
about that. You've heard my story. Yes.
violated in that way. And like, I'm so happy I don't remember it. you
Oh,
know,
good. Did you block it
I
out
just,
mentally?
I read that in the paperwork. And finally she emerged. Just that I didn't experience ring of fire, I didn't experience any of those things. Like when I say that I was taken to another place and just had, like, I just feel like God had his hands all over me at that point, because I know that my story, I was meant to come out of it and share some good.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can think of it.
Yeah.
So I just wrapped her up. Jordan brought her up and look at pictures. And I said, I want Jordan to be the first person that touched her, but there's the midwife's hands on her and the nurse's hands on her. And then she's handed to Jordan, whatever. And that's when everything shifted. She wasn't allowed that time to transition, right? Like we all know that mothers are babies' best resuscitators. A baby on a mother's skin, a baby left to be spoken to, talked to. When they sat her on me, I don't know why. I started rubbing her back and really wanted to talk to her, and she was floppy. And the midwife was like, "No, no, no, don't touch her like that." Like, just right off the bat, right? Like, when you think you can't get broken down anymore, is like when you're a mother within the first seconds of being a mom and you're not mothering right, So
Yeah.
at that moment, they took her from me and started suctioning her with the bulb. And then, there's all these numbers flying out, and they're like, "We need to get the oxygen." What is that? I'm not a medical professional. The thing they put on her finger, the
Oximeter.
oximeter. Yeah, they got an oximeter all in this matter of time. APGAR scores are flying. They're checking her oxygen levels. And then they're like, "No, we need to do CPAP." None of this is being done on me. None of this is being done skin to skin. It wasn't an hour after she was born that she was put on me, and I even got to look into her eyes. In the midst of all of this, they were weighing her, they were measuring
So
her.
did they take her, cut her from her umbilical cord during all of
No,
this? Or she
no,
was still attached?
yeah, we
Okay.
managed to keep her attached
Because
to her.
you
That was
had
one of my
had your
wishes.
placenta very quickly. So,
Yeah, yeah. That was one
okay.
of my wishes that was at least honored, was that she stayed attached to her cord. But sometimes I can't, it's good that she was connected to her cord, but there was so much disturbance, and they were touching so much and doing so much that I don't know if it I don't know if it mattered at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah.
Things were already being so heavily disturbed. And I just that's kind of goes back to that sense of urgency I had to deliver the placenta, was the tension in that room and the fear in that room. You could cut with a knife, you know. I knew we were going to get transferred, and I just knew, and not that I wanted to.
Really? So you just had that
That,
intuition. You're like, this
yeah,
is,
yeah.
they're going to transfer me.
And she did. She came out. There's pictures. She came out a little gray. She had a little bit of blue lips, but she needed that time to come into her body. She needed time to be honored and left alone. I
Mhm.
cannot imagine how jarring it was to emerge from me, her safe, warm mother, and be syringed aggressively, prodded, poked. I listening to her mother being told she doesn't know how to mother, being laid on a hard surface to be weighed. I can't quite understand, in the midst of an emergency, why we would have the time to weigh a baby and measure her,
Yeah, really.
you know? And I'm really having a hard
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And
If it's such an emergency, why are you measuring her?
yeah, yeah, because I have pictures from my doula with my baby with CPAP on, getting measured and weighed. And it's just like, this doesn't feel like an emergency for me. This feels like we're creating an emergency.
Mm.
Um, and like I said, I just cannot to this day understand, the more I learned about physiologic birth and just physiologic truths, is why she wasn't left on me. And granted, I think at one of the points she was on Jordan, but like, what does his hairy chest do for a baby? You know, right? It's
Yeah,
better than a cold floor, but let's not
sure.
settle within the first minutes of my child life.
Sure.
Um, and I want to say, what was her oxygen at the end? And that's when they decided, I think it was 85 with CPAP, which I'm not a nurse. I'm pretty sure 85 and a really pink responsive baby isn't means to transfer, but there was no room for nuance, and there was no room for gray area there.
Mm.
There was no respect for the time that it can take.
Hmm.
And that is kind of what I think shifts from undisturbed birth and managed birth, whether it is at a hospital or it is with a midwife, is if there is not someone who's comfortable with gray area, because there's gray area between life and death, right? I believe.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, Especially with how disturbed she was, that's what led us to be transferred. And then, getting into abandonment by my midwives, and also being left 3 hours waiting at the birth center for 3 hours away from my daughter within her first moments of life. I wasn't transferred with her. I had to stay.
Really?
Mhm.
So they transferred her, not you.
Did your husband go with her?
Yeah. But it was peak COVID. He couldn't even go in.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Talk about a traumatic experience for you as a first time mom that your baby is stripped away from you, sent off to this place. And I'm sure because you are a very naturally minded, researched person, that there were also things that you didn't want done to your baby. And now your baby is being put into a hospital situation where you're not even there to keep eyes on the situation. The anxiety that you must have felt, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, and I had this moment of shame too when I had to call my mom and tell her that she was transferred because I felt like my mom was going to be like, "I told you so."
Mm.
And I kind of felt like I failed and I was ashamed because I spoke of natural birth and those things with so much vigor and excitement that all the people who kind of spoke fear over me or wanted to trauma bond over, the sad realities of birth were going to be like, ha, we told you so, and
Mhm.
my mom didn't do that. That wasn't a me thing, but that
That
was also,
that was your fear, but you know that this had nothing to do with you.
yeah. Yes. But at the same time, like, I have to be realistic with myself. A little bit of it did because I did not take responsibility over my birth and I outsourced my
Sure.
decisions.
But we
You
don't know
know,
those
we
things.
don't know what we don't know. And that's
Yeah.
what my husband always says.
Yep.
But
You know it now. And
yeah,
once you learn these things and once you gain your voice, you can speak for yourself. But being in this situation and scenario for the first time, and you mentioned earlier about the thinking brain, we're not in the same brain space when we are in our birthing time or postpartum or even pregnant. We're not thinking the same way, and we shouldn't have to fight.
right.
That's like the whole point is that we should be able to be relaxed, be at peace. Everything happens as it naturally does. We shouldn't have to fight and argue with people. It's an unnatural response for you to have had to have done that. So please don't blame yourself because even though you know now
Yeah,
that, you chew somebody up at this
right.
point, you didn't know that then. I mean, this is all a learning experience for us as we go through these situations.
Um, do you want me to talk about her like brief NICU stay and
Of
the Irish?
course.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd love to hear how that went and especially how that was on you and your husband. That must have been very challenging.
Yeah, it was. I think that men, they want to create and foster safety and
Yes.
like
Mhm.
control. And at that moment, he was completely out of control. And, he kind of had to pick, right? Who am I going to be here for? And obviously, like, we both picked like him leaving and being with our daughter. And we were both so angry and so confused, right? Because like even when we went in to see her at the hospital, she was doing so good, and it was just so infuriating to witness, all the things that we didn't want, right? Like her hooked up to all these cords, her lying alone in a plastic box swaddled, her in a room full of very sick babies, right? Like I try and wrap my head around, I've heard this term, the mental gymnastics of a perfectly healthy baby peak COVID in a hospital, right? And like those were the things that were coming over us, is like, God, like we have this healthy baby in a
Yeah, and you're
place.
sending her the pits of COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where we were uncomfortable. So I want to say she got to the hospital like at 6:30. By the next morning at 8, she was off of IV. She was no longer on CPAP, and she was held for 2.5 days for surveillance. Inside of
So
those 2 days,
unnecessarily held inside of this prison
yes,
because of protocol.
yep, just in case, was given routine antibiotics without my consent.
Oh my God.
Um, and I can't necessarily wrap my head around why she was given antibiotics. I do think there was meconium present behind my waters. I don't know if that's why they did it, like as a
Yeah, but
precautionary
still.
measure for pneumonia,
Did you
perhaps.
have the GBS swab done?
No.
Maybe they did, because sometimes their protocol, if there's no GBS on file,
Hmm.
even if you've done it, if they don't have the results of it, sometimes they will administer for protocol
Yeah.
antibiotics. So perhaps that's
Yeah.
Just my guess.
Yes. Yeah, probably. I mean, it's just like so shitty. It's like we don't weigh pros and cons, right? We're like, wreck our gut and,
Oh yeah, yeah.
potentially create all these issues, or we'll just do this just in case, to make
There's
It's
nothing
ourselves.
wrong here,
candy.
but why not? Let's just administer some good old heavy antibiotics into a newborn baby that just came out of someone's womb 5 seconds
And,
ago.
and they inflated her with a lot of dextrose, which I thought was so interesting, was the sugar water.
Oh my
And
gosh, I'm you just made me think of the whole breastfeeding part of this,
Mhm.
which I'm
my
sure you're gonna get to.
Yeah, she was given formula without my consent. I was told to let go of my pride and just feed my baby so that I could go home. Mind you, my milk wasn't coming in because I was so stressed.
Oh
I was
yeah,
so
and your
burdened.
baby
My
wasn't
my womb
attached to
was sore. We weren't really being encouraged to breastfeed. No, I didn't know what to do. I was a stranger in my own body. And when I look back to those moments, it was like I was in the room. Like sometimes I still feel mad at myself, but I was in the room, but I was like watching from up here,
Mhm.
and I was watching my baby and I was watching me. And I was still just kind of like, well, what do I do now? And I had got donor breast milk because I was like, we're not going to do the formula thing. And they denied my donor breast milk because it did not come from where they source their breast milk, and they could not verify that it fit their standards.
Oh my word.
And this may sound insensitive, but this is still always the thing that I say. Like, if I got that breast milk from a crackhead out back and that's the breast milk that I want to use, that is my right,
Yeah,
you know. And I
sure.
paid for that breast milk, mind you. The birth center charged me for that breast
Oh my
milk.
god.
So
So
it was also
you got it
annoying.
through the birth center that is affiliated with this hospital, and then they still wouldn't allow you to give your child breast milk
Hmm.
instead of
Which is just so
manufactured
ridiculous
formula.
because the baby belongs to you, not the hospital.
Hmm. Yeah, but in those
That's
moments, the lines were blurred,
yeah. Yeah.
considering it was a very healthy baby. And I going back, like really to speak on that, I would never do that again. It would have been, we can call CPS, we can do whatever we need to do, but we're leaving. We're
Mhm.
absolutely leaving. I had to witness my baby sit in the car seat for 60 minutes just to see how she would do. Have you guys heard of that?
Oh, where they have
Yeah.
them sit in there before you leave just to make
Yes.
sure that
The car
they
seat
Yes.
test. Yeah.
Well, my
Yeah.
milk hadn't came in, and I was probably in the same diaper because I wasn't going to leave her side,
Mhm,
especially because we denied all vaccinations.
mhm,
Personal preference, we especially didn't want vitamin K. And you would have thought that I was the most abusive mother in that hospital. Um, my husband and I were kind of played against each other. The tone that the doctor on staff gave my husband and the tone she gave me were completely different. And
mm,
we really had to have this moment where we united. And I was like, no, we talked about this. And I told you that things like this could happen. Because I think she kind of got to him in a way that
Mhm.
you play that dead baby card, no one wants one of those. And he really was like, okay, I trust you. You told me
mhm,
this. And really cannot commend my husband more than the way that he trusts me and knows that I want what's best for my kids, right? And
mhm.
and the
Good
risk
for you.
with the reward for that wasn't worth it for me. But it was.
Absolutely. They played the dead baby card with me too. The OB that I had in my birth plan that I
Mhm.
didn't want vitamin K, and she said, "Well, your baby could die." And I said, "How many babies in your practice have died from not getting vitamin K?" And she
Mhm.
said, "Uh,
Yeah,
uh."
chasing her
Guess what?
tail.
She didn't have an answer because none. The answer was 0. No
Yeah.
babies have died from not getting vitamin K. But guess what? Vitamin K has a black box warning. Baby could die from getting it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Anyway, we won't go on that tangent right now, but we
I
can.
know. I'm gonna get your podcast flagged.
That's okay. That's what I'm looking for.
I was, I got finally was given a medical grade pump because I was like researching all these things. Why isn't my milk in? Why am I just not good enough already? Like, why are all these things happening to me? I can't
Mhm.
even feed my baby. And then I look back and I'm like, they gave me 28 millimeter flanges, which I mean, I don't know if many people know this, but like standard breast pump flange sizes aren't even close to the size
No,
the
no, no.
average woman's nipple. So not only is it a plastic device that is likely to not simulate my milk coming in, but they're 18 million sizes too big, we're not really fostering much, and we're not incentivizing my milk to come in.
Mhm.
So finally, I remember that day, that last morning, I told the nurse on call, I was like, we're leaving today. I was like, we're gonna leave with her, or we can do it nicely and you can get all our paperwork together and we can do all, I'm willing to check all your boxes. We'll all take these shaken baby syndrome classes. You can sit her in the car seat for an hour, but we're leaving because she's not unhealthy. And because I had heard her muttering over, like, there was like a 30 weeker across the room. There was sick kids. My daughter was not sick. They couldn't get the IVs in her because she was so chunky. I watched them one time 12 different times try and put an IV in her head because they couldn't put it anywhere else. And they finally, one of the nurses said, she really doesn't need the IV anyway, so we'll just stop.
Oh my gosh.
It was this kind
And
of
she was, by the time you had her, she was 39 and 6, it sounds like. She was
a
full term baby.
definitely healthy girl,
Oh my
who
goodness.
truly would have done best with me at home, nestled in bed.
Mhm.
And what do you know it? That day we got home, my milk came in full force. I
Oh,
honestly,
what a
I
miracle.
felt my milk let down in the car on the way home. And it
Wow.
was a bit of a Pam Anderson moment. It was wild. But, and we had to work through a lot of different things. A nipple shield was thrown on my breast at the hospital, which, just created a lot of problems with latch, etc. She did have oral tethers that we navigated through, but it was like.
She did or didn't?
She did.
Okay.
But over my dead body, was I not going to breastfeed that little girl? And was
Sure.
I going to be talked out of it? Because that was like our moment.
Yeah.
To me, breastfeeding was like our thing because everything else had really been so hijacked,
Absolutely. Well, Courtney, this story is so powerful and so riveting. We want to continue the conversation. So stay tuned. Those of you that are listening in, we are going to continue talking with Courtney, and you will hear the rest of her story next week. And especially, she had a very different experience for baby number 2, right?
Yes.
And so we're excited to share that with you and the remainder of her story here. So thank you for tuning in, Courtney. Thank you for sharing this first part of your story with us.
Thank you.
Awesome. And if you are looking to find Courtney, you can find her on Instagram at Southwest Birth Worker or on her blog, southwestbirthworker.com. And again, thank you for tuning in. We can't wait for you to join us next week to hear the remainder of this journey. And if you'd like to follow along outside the podcast, you can join the mission on Instagram or Facebook at The Radiant Mission or on YouTube. And today we're going to close with Deuteronomy 31:6. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. We're wishing you a radiant week, and we will see you next week.
Bye, guys.